You ever notice how the moment tension rises, logic disappears, like something switches inside of us, and suddenly we're not listening to understand, we're listening to respond. You can feel it in the air, the tone changes, the words sharpen, and before you know it, the person you care about turns into the person you're trying to win against. But what if I told you the most powerful people in any room aren't the ones who talk the loudest? They're the ones who pause the longest. See, there's a rule I live by. It's simple. It's called the 3-question rule. And if you use it, truly use it, you can stop almost any fight before it ever begins. Here it is. Before you respond, ask yourself 3 questions. Does this need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Does it need to be said right now? The first question cuts through ego. Does this need to be said? Because most of what we want to say in anger isn't wisdom. It's wounded pride searching for relief. Sometimes silence says more than any sentence ever could. The second question humbles the heart. Does it need to be said by me? Because not every correction is your assignment. Some lessons are meant to be learned through experience, not explanation. When you can walk away knowing you don't need to fix everything, you start operating from peace instead of pressure. And that third question, does it need to be said right now? That's the game changer, because timing is the difference between impact and injury. Sometimes truth delivered too soon sounds like attack, but truth delivered in peace feels like love. Wisdom knows the difference. Detachment isn't weakness. It's strength under control. It's standing in the storm without letting the storm inside of you. It's looking someone in the eye, hearing their anger, and knowing this isn't about me, it's about their pain. And when you realize that, you stop fighting people and you start healing moments. See, emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care deeply, but you're not controlled by the chaos. You're anchored, centered, rooted in something unshakable, and from that place, peace becomes your power. You can't be baited, you can't be broken, because your calm has become your confidence. Every time you use this rule, you are choosing evolution over reaction. You're stepping out of the pattern that keeps people stuck, proving, defending, shouting, and stepping into the posture that transforms room's presence, patience, and purpose. Because when your peace becomes louder than your pride, the fight loses its fuel. And that's when the world begins to listen. True power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering your own reaction. You can spend a lifetime trying to get people to act right, speak right, treat you right, and still end up exhausted, frustrated, and disappointed. Because the truth is, the only person you ever truly have control over is yourself. When you stop trying to control others, you start reclaiming your peace. Real strength isn't about bending others to your will. It's about keeping your will steady when others are losing theirs. The person who can remain composed in the face of chaos isn't weak. They're the strongest one in the room. Anyone can raise their voice, but not everyone can raise their awareness. It takes courage to stay calm when someone is trying to provoke you. It takes maturity to listen without defending, and it takes wisdom to understand that not every reaction deserves your energy. When you master your reaction, you break the chain of emotional control that others unconsciously place on you. You stop letting someone else's storm decide your forecast. There's a quiet authority in the one who doesn't flinch, the one who listens, breathes, and waits before speaking. That person isn't detached, they're discerning. They've learned that reacting in anger only multiplies confusion, while responding in peace restores clarity. Controlling others might give you a temporary illusion of power, but mastering yourself gives you lasting influence, because people can resist your words, but they can't ignore your presence when it carries calm conviction. Every reaction is a choice, even when it doesn't feel like it. The pause between what happens and how you respond is your moment of power. Most people live as if they have none, as if emotions are automatic and anger is inevitable. But once you realize that you can choose your state before choosing your words, you begin to rise above manipulation, offense, and ego. That's the essence of inner leadership, responding, not reacting. The goal isn't to win every argument or prove every point. It's to protect your inner peace like sacred ground, because the person who can remain steady in the middle of tension carries a rare kind of authority. Not the kind that dominates, but the kind that transforms. Every fight begins where understanding ends. When emotion takes the driver's seat and wisdom steps aside, most conflicts don't start because of what was said, but because of what wasn't understood. The moment we stop listening to hear and start listening to defend, the bridge between hearts collapses. And once that happens, it's no longer a conversation, it's a competition. Each person is no longer fighting for peace, they're fighting for validation. But no one wins when both are trying to be right instead of trying to be real. Understanding requires humility. It demands that you put your ego in the back seat and let empathy take the wheel. It's not easy, especially when you feel misunderstood or attacked. But the truth is, emotion clouds perception. When anger takes control, everything you hear becomes distorted by pain. You start hearing tone instead of truth. And in that moment, wisdom, that calm, steady voice within, is drowned out by the noise of the moment. That's where fights are born, not in what's said, but in how it's received. The wisest thing you can do in a heated moment is to pause and ask yourself, what am I not understanding right now? Because behind every harsh word is usually a hurt heart. People rarely yell because they're evil. They yell because they're unheard. If you can see the wound beneath the words, you'll stop fighting the person and start addressing the pain. That's emotional intelligence, the ability to see beyond behavior and into the why. Wisdom doesn't shout to be heard. It waits to be invited. It's that quiet awareness that tells you not every reaction deserves a response, and not every accusation deserves an answer. When you let wisdom guide your words, you don't have to raise your voice to raise the level of the conversation. You start to disarm the other person simply by refusing to mirror their emotion. Fights die where understanding begins. The moment one person chooses to listen, the energy in the room shifts. You can feel it. The tension softens, the anger loses its grip, and the truth starts to surface. Because at the end of every conflict, what people really want isn't victory. It's to be seen, heard, and understood. Emotional detachment isn't coldness. It's the warmth of clarity under pressure. Too often, people confuse detachment with indifference, as if staying calm means you don't care. But true detachment is the opposite. It's caring deeply without losing yourself in the chaos. It's the ability to stay centered in love, truth, and purpose even when everything around you is shaking. It's standing firm in who you are, no matter how loudly emotion tries to pull you out of alignment. When you're emotionally detached, you can feel deeply without being ruled by those feelings. You can hear harsh words and still choose not to internalize them. You can see someone else's anger and recognize it as their storm, not yours. This isn't avoidance, it's mastery, because you've learned that reacting in the heat of emotion never heals. It only deepens the wound. Detachment allows you to see clearly, respond wisely, and protect your peace. That clarity is what separates strength from struggle. The warmth of detachment is in its compassion. When you're no longer entangled in the emotional pull of conflict, you can finally see people for what they are, human, hurting, and trying their best. You begin to listen differently. You no longer take offense as quickly because you understand that pain often speaks louder than logic. You don't retaliate, you relate. And in doing so, you turn potential fights into opportunities for growth. Detachment isn't about numbing your heart. It's about freeing it from the weight of every moment. It gives you room to breathe before reacting, to think before speaking, and to love without losing your center. The detached person can walk through fire without becoming part of the flames. They can face rejection without bitterness, confrontation without collapse, and misunderstanding without resentment. The secret is this: emotional detachment is not a wall, it's a window. It doesn't block connection, it filters distortion. It lets you see the situation as it is, not as your emotions paint it. And from that place of clarity, your words carry weight, your actions carry wisdom, and your presence carries peace. Because when you stop letting your emotions lead you, your spirit begins to guide you. And that's when real strength begins. The mind that pauses before responding is the mind that wins the moment. That pause, that sacred space between what happens and how you choose to react, is where wisdom lies. Most people rush to fill silence with sound, to defend themselves, to prove a point, to protect their pride. But the ones who truly hold power know the value of stillness, because silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. It's the difference between reacting to emotion and responding from understanding. That pause is your protection. It keeps you from saying things you'll later regret and helps you see what's really happening beneath the surface. When you pause, you shift the energy. You step out of the current of chaos and into the stillness of control. The person who pauses owns the conversation because they're no longer being pulled by the emotion of the moment. They're guiding it. You can't think clearly when your emotions are racing, but the pause resets your clarity. It gives your heart time to calm and your mind time to process. And in that breath, your power returns. You realize you don't have to match their tone, prove your point, or win the argument. You only have to stay aligned with your peace. That one pause can change the entire outcome of a conflict. It gives you perspective. You begin to see that not everything needs a reaction. Not every comment deserves a response. And not every challenge requires you to engage. Some things resolve themselves the moment you stop feeding them energy. And when you learn that, your presence begins to speak louder than your words ever could. Pausing isn't about holding back your voice. It's about giving your wisdom room to speak. It's learning to trust that what you don't say often carries more weight than what you do. Because impulsive words can cut deep, but intentional words can heal. When you pause, you give yourself the chance to choose which kind of words you want to release into the world. The pause is a reflection of mastery. It's a quiet statement that says, I'm not ruled by emotion, I'm led by awareness. And when you start living from that awareness, you don't just win arguments, you win peace. When you stop needing to prove your point, your peace becomes your proof. The urge to be understood, to be right, to be validated. It's one of the most human desires we have. We want people to see our intentions, to agree with our logic, to admit when we're right. But the moment your peace depends on someone else as acknowledgement, you hand them the power to disturb it. Real strength is quiet. It doesn't need applause, agreement, or validation. It stands firm in the truth even if no one else sees it yet. Because truth doesn't need defending. It reveals itself in time. The need to prove yourself is often the echo of old wounds. The feeling of not being seen, not being valued, not being enough. So we argue harder, explain longer, raise our voice higher, hoping that somehow they'll finally understand. But the more you fight to be understood, the more misunderstood you feel. That's because peace doesn't live in persuasion, it lives in surrender, surrendering the need to control the narrative, and trusting that your integrity will speak louder than your explanation ever could. When you stop arguing to prove your point, you create space for clarity. You stop talking from emotion and start operating from alignment. You realize that someone else's misunderstanding of you isn't your responsibility to fix. You can't teach peace through tension, and you can't earn respect by begging for it. The moment you stop explaining yourself to those determined to misunderstand you, you reclaim your freedom. There's a deep kind of authority that comes from quiet confidence. It's the peace of knowing who you are and what you stand for without needing anyone to confirm it. You start showing up differently, calmer, clearer, lighter. Your silence becomes your strength, your composure becomes your message, and your consistency becomes your evidence. People start to notice that you don't chase validation, you embody it. Your peace becomes your proof when you no longer have to prove your peace, because the truth is no argument can outshine the light of a calm spirit. And when others see that you no longer react to chaos, they recognize that you've stepped into mastery. Not of them, but of yourself. You cannot fix chaos with more chaos. Calm is the only language chaos understands. When tension rises, our instinct is to match the energy in front of us. Someone yells, we yell back. Someone attacks, we defend. It feels natural, even justified. But all that does is feed the fire. You can't heal noise with more noise. The moment you match their chaos, you lose your peace and the situation spirals into confusion. True strength is found not in reacting, but in regulating, in being the steady presence that refuses to be pulled into the storm. Chaos feeds on reaction. It grows stronger when you participate in it. That's why calm is so powerful. It starves chaos of its fuel. When you choose stillness instead of shouting, when you choose understanding instead of accusation, something shifts. The other person's energy has nowhere to go. They either mirror your calm or expose their lack of it. Either way, you've changed the rhythm of the moment. Calm disrupts chaos by refusing to play its game. It's not submission, it's strategy. It's a spiritual stance that says, I'm not joining this storm. I am becoming the peace that ends it. Staying calm doesn't mean you don't feel anger, disappointment, or frustration. It means you don't let those emotions dictate your behavior. You acknowledge them without being controlled by them. Calm doesn't suppress emotion, it transcends it. It gives you clarity to see beyond the surface and recognize what's really going on. The fear, the hurt, the insecurity that often hides behind anger. When you can see the root, you no longer fight the symptom. In the presence of true calm, even chaos becomes uncomfortable because calm carries authority. It shifts the atmosphere. It communicates that you are grounded, centered, and unshakable. People can't argue with someone who refuses to engage in the energy of conflict. They might keep pushing, but eventually they realize there's nothing to push against. Your peace becomes the wall that their chaos cannot climb. You fix chaos by being what it isn't. Steady, still, and sure, every time you choose calm over reaction, you remind yourself and others that peace isn't passive. It's power, and it always speaks louder than the noise trying to destroy it. The three-question rule shifts focus from reaction to reflection, from ego to empathy. Most conflicts aren't born from what we say, but from how quickly we say it. When emotion takes the lead, our words become weapons instead of bridges. The three-question rule creates space, a sacred pause that allows wisdom to step in before words step out. It's a practice that asks you to think beyond impulse, to move from, how can I win this, to, what will this create? It transforms your speech from defensive to intentional, your tone from reactive to redemptive. When you stop and ask, does this need to be said, you're training your heart to prioritize peace over pride. You realize that not every thought deserves a voice, and not every truth needs to be spoken in this moment. The power isn't in what you can say, it's in what you can hold back. Because silence at the right time is far louder than words spoken in haste. That single question cuts through ego and invites humility. Then comes the next question, does it need to be said by me? That's where empathy enters. It reminds you that not every problem is yours to fix, not every misunderstanding is yours to clear. Sometimes your silence allows another person to face their reflection without your interference. Wisdom knows that timing and assignment are not the same. Just because you see something doesn't mean you're meant to speak it. And finally, does it need to be said right now? That's where reflection replaces reaction. Because even truth, when spoken out of season, can sound like offense. Waiting doesn't weaken your message, it strengthens it. It allows emotions to settle and hearts to open. The same sentence that would start a fight in anger can start healing in calm. This three-question rule isn't about censorship. It's about stewardship, guarding your words because you understand their power. It shifts your energy from trying to be right to trying to bring peace. It helps you rise above the moment instead of being swallowed by it. When reflection becomes your habit, your words begin to heal, your silence begins to teach, and your presence begins to lead. Detachment gives you the higher view. It's how you stop fighting for victory and start standing for peace. When you're emotionally entangled in a conflict, everything feels personal. Every word feels like a weapon, every pause feels like rejection, and every disagreement feels like disrespect. But when you detach, not from the person, but from the emotion, you rise above the battlefield. You start seeing the situation from a higher perspective, not through the lens of pain or pride, but through the eyes of wisdom. Detachment doesn't mean you walk away. It means you step back far enough to see clearly. From that higher view, everything slows down. The noise quiets. You begin to realize that not every argument is worth your energy, and not every offense deserves a response. Detachment allows you to separate your identity from the issue. You stop asking, how could they do this to me? And start asking, what is this moment trying to teach me? That shift turns confrontation into revelation. Because sometimes what looks like an attack is really an invitation, an opportunity to grow in patience, humility, and strength. When you're detached, you're not cold, you're composed. You're not indifferent, you're discerning. You don't need to win the fight because you've already won your peace. You start to see that victory isn't about overpowering the other person, it's about mastering your own response. And in doing so, you create a safe space where understanding can return. Detachment gives you altitude. And with altitude comes perspective. You can see the storm for what it is: temporary, emotional, human. There's a quiet power in being the calm one. The one who doesn't mirror the anger but transforms it. The one who can listen without absorbing, observe without judging, and speak without wounding. That kind of presence changes rooms. It changes relationships. Because when you stop trying to win, you make space for both people to be heard. That's when peace enters. Detachment isn't distance, it's depth. It's the ability to stay connected without being consumed. When you learn to stand for peace instead of fighting for victory, you stop needing to be above anyone. You just need to be within yourself. That's where true freedom begins. People mirror your energy. When you choose calm, you give them permission to return to reason. Human beings are emotional mirrors. We reflect what we receive. When someone raises their voice, our instinct is to raise ours. When they accuse, we defend. When they attack, we strike back. But what most people don't realize is that this automatic exchange keeps both sides trapped in reaction. The energy you project becomes the energy you invite. So, if you stay grounded when others are losing control, you shift the emotional tone of the moment. Calm disarms chaos because it interrupts the pattern of escalation. When you choose calm, you're not just controlling yourself, you're leading the room. People subconsciously respond to the emotional temperature of whoever appears most stable. That's why the calm person often carries quiet authority. They don't need to shout to be heard. Their stillness commands attention. Calm energy spreads because it offers safety. When emotions are high, people instinctively look for stability, and the one who refuses to be rattled becomes that anchor. Without even saying a word, you become a mirror of peace in a room full of unrest. It's not about pretending to be unaffected. It's about mastering what you transmit. You can feel anger without becoming it. You can feel hurt without projecting it. Your calm becomes a silent invitation for others to meet you on your level. It tells them, "I don't have to do this the hard way." Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a heated conversation is to lower your tone, slow your breathing, and let your peace speak louder than your frustration. The moment you do, the atmosphere begins to change. People rarely soften because you prove them wrong. They soften because they feel safe. Calm creates that safety. It breaks down walls that argument builds. It communicates strength, not submission, the kind of strength that doesn't need to dominate, only to understand. The longer you practice this, the more you'll notice how quickly others begin to mirror your stillness, because emotional energy is contagious and peace is the most powerful contagion of all. When you lead with calm, you don't just stop fights. You transform hearts. Mastering this rule isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about transforming it into connection. Conflict isn't the enemy, it's the doorway to deeper understanding. The problem is, most people treat disagreement as danger. They brace for battle instead of leaning into discovery. But when you apply the 3-question rule and practice emotional detachment, something remarkable happens. Conflict stops being a threat to your peace and becomes a tool for growth. You stop fighting to win and start listening to understand. You start realizing that tension doesn't have to tear relationships apart. It can strengthen them if handled with wisdom. Transformation begins when you stop reacting from ego and start responding from empathy. Every disagreement holds a truth, not necessarily about who's right, but about what matters to each person. When you're calm enough to listen beneath the surface, you begin to hear what people really mean, but can't always say. Behind anger, there's usually hurt. Behind defensiveness, there's fear. When you learn to hear the pain instead of the volume, you connect beyond the words. That's what it means to transform conflict. You turn friction into understanding, resistance into respect. Avoiding conflict might keep things quiet, but it doesn't bring peace. It only buries emotions that eventually resurface in harsher ways. True mastery isn't silence born of fear, it's peace born of clarity. You can face disagreement without losing your center because you're no longer trying to control outcomes. You're guiding energy. You're leading the conversation toward truth instead of tension. And that doesn't mean everyone will agree with you, but it does mean everyone will feel seen. When people feel seen, they stop shouting. When they feel heard, they stop defending. That's the hidden power of emotional mastery. It doesn't silence people, it softens them. You begin to realize that connection doesn't require perfect agreement, only mutual respect. The 3-question rule gives you the space to choose words that build instead of break, and the awareness to pause before turning pain into punishment. So mastering this rule isn't about avoiding hard moments, it's about redeeming them. It's about showing that calm isn't avoidance, it's elevation. And once you learn to turn conflict into connection, you don't just end fights, you restore hearts. At the end of it all, peace isn't something you find, it's something you choose over and over again, especially when it's hardest. Every moment of conflict gives you a choice to react and repeat the same cycle or to rise and rewrite it. The 3-question rule is more than a communication tool. It's a mirror that shows you who you really are when pressure hits. It teaches you that silence can be strength, restraint can be wisdom, and calm can be power. You don't have to win every battle to walk in victory. You just have to stop letting people pull you into wars that cost your peace. Because the one who stays grounded, who pauses, who listens, who loves even when it's not deserved, that's the one who truly holds authority. The goal isn't to prove you're right, it's to protect what's sacred inside you. When you master your reaction, you master the moment. And when you master the moment, you master your life. So the next time a fight tries to pull you in, breathe. Ask the 3 questions. Choose calm. Let your peace speak for you. Because in a world that's constantly shouting, the quiet soul, the one who stands steady in love and refuses to be moved, becomes the loudest voice of all.